이어서 우리 이제 다니엘 바스가드 우리 박사님.
I want to thank you for your gracious introduction. And there are times when I don't know how valuable an asset I am to my administration when I ask them to do something that they are not prone to do, let's put it that way. Today I'm going to take a little bit different slant than we've had here in the last day or so, last day and a half. And I'm going to try to give you some of my thoughts and some of my colleagues' thoughts about incentives or motivational steps that need to be taken to push science in general into thinking much more seriously about broad-ranged research ethics, about its social responsibilities, and really about hope also, which is a I consider a neglected virtue, a neglected item in terms of discussion in science. If you notice my title, it says Science and the Global Public, the Importance of Integrity to the Social Contract. I think that'll become a little bit more obvious as I go through here. But integrity is such an enormous issue. It's such an enormous, presents enormous conflicts when you are trying to integrate it into whatever your field is, whatever your process is. In our own university, we have ethics classes that go back a century in terms of journalism and law and others, and even in biology and others. But only of late, in the last 10 years or so, have we thought about formal scientific ethics or science ethics classes, science integrity classes. It is common at West Virginia University, and I've been with 3 different institutions over my academic career. 10 years ago, it was very scattered, you might say, in terms of the classes that you might find that were devoted to scientific research ethics or scientific responsible conduct of research. So let's delve a little bit further into what I'm talking about here. There we go. Let me start with a quote from Michel Foucault. He is a philosopher from the 20th century, French philosopher. He wrote an enormous amount, and this is one of my favorite lines from him. I think that this probably comes from my own feelings about gravitating about the importance of science itself. Foucault said in the Minimalist Self, which I consider to be his best work, "I know that knowledge can transform us, that truth is not only a way of deciphering the world, it makes us different beings." Foucault was alluding to the fact that we could go back, as an example, we could go back 2,000 years, and we could take one of us in this room and transpose us into the streets of Rome or onto the streets of Tokyo, even, if you want to, or Seoul. And biologically, we would do just fine on those streets. You could take an individual from 2,000 years ago and you could put them into our present streets in Seoul or in New York or Tokyo or wherever. And biologically, again, these people would do just fine. The issue is what they know and what they can think and just exactly how they approach the world around them. To Foucault, knowledge changes people. So he would consider the nature of human beings from now to be totally different from those that lived 2,000 years ago. The pathways that we have to try and to frame our world and to try to decipher it. We are not just, in the past it was much more traditional to think of ourselves as almost like engineers trying to see how things how they work and figuring out how A goes to B goes to C. But he's saying it becomes much, much more complex than that. And seeing our role in the universe our global role, the communal role, the universal role that Robert Merton talked about that we have within the universe is one that transforms us as human beings. I was going through and I was thinking about trying to find, this was for a talk I was given not too long ago, and I had composed the talk already. I was sitting in my hotel room and I was trying to look for I think people who do any kind of talking more than regularly are kind of want to try to find a hook at the beginning of a talk to hold people in. And I came across this, and the copy of the National Geographic, their 125th anniversary. And I looked, Why We Explore. And I was thinking, well, that's fascinating. And thinking about exactly what I was getting ready to talk about, which of course was some variation on research ethics or research integrity. The lead article, again, Why We Explore, moved into it. What are we as human beings by nature? Just exactly, how do we decipher exactly these movements, this unceasing and this relentless curiosity that we have? Just for an example, yesterday, a rocket, a space rocket goes down, it explodes and it falls. Is that going to be the end of our desires to explore the universe and to step out into space? No, it won't. We just keep going and going. And as the author says here, no other mammal moves around like we do, says Pabo of the Max Planck Institute in Munich for evolutionary anthropology. We jump borders. We push into new territory when we have resources where we are. Other animals don't do this. Other humans either. Neanderthals were around for hundreds of thousands of years, but they never spread around the world. They were centralized, or they found themselves just kind of stationary in a small portion of Europe and a little bit of North Africa. But in just 50,000 years, we, Homo sapiens, have covered everything. There's a kind of madness to it, sailing out into the ocean. You have no idea what's on the other side. And no, we go to Mars. We never stop. Why? The Human Genome Project has allowed us to trace our roots and where we started. Homo sapiens, at least the most recent research I've seen, and I've seen some more recent research that said it might be even a little older. But in general, I hear that the first Homo sapiens were about 250,000 years ago in sub-Saharan Africa. They settled into that area, stayed relatively stationary for a couple 100,000 years, but about 50,000 years ago, all of a sudden, boom, human beings start moving. And they start moving they move down into South Africa, they move up into North Africa, they start crossing over into the Middle East and over into Western Europe and Eastern Europe. They start traveling up over through Russia and over into the Bering Strait, down into North America, come traveling through South Asia, Central Asia, and Southeast Asia. There was a land bridge at that time down into Australia. We keep pushing down into there. And then we get out to Australia and we stop, look out at the ocean over there, and you would say to yourself, well, we should stop here. But they don't stop. Sail out into the ocean, just keep going. And they keep going on to further and further islands and to that. And that's just exactly what we have done as human beings. It's explained lately as that we have genes within ourselves that infuse this desire to keep moving. An exploration dynamic is what they call it, has arisen in Homo sapiens whose foundation lies within our genome in the form of a mutation of a gene called DRD4, which helps control dopamine, important to learning and reward, and is tied to curiosity and restlessness. DRD4-7R2R. You get a shot. Think of your first time. I mean, I remember back when I was in 9th grade, and I remember I had been working on a particular algebraic technique in algebra, and I just couldn't master it, and I just kept working on it, looking, trying to put things, but I couldn't just pull it all together. And then all of a sudden, I just, my teacher at the time, and I still remember him, and it was Mr. Norton, and he reaches over and he showed me one thing, and all of a sudden, it just exploded within me, and I saw what it was. And all of a sudden, this insight that I had. And he's talking about, and this is that infusion of dopamine, just kind of just flooded inside of my body. I still, here I am, so many, many decades later, and I still remember that moment, that rush that I got from learning something and from mastering a technique or mastering sort of a process. And that defines us. There's something about Homo sapiens in which we've had this gene mutation, and it hasn't infused itself within us, this restlessness to push forward. I put this in this quote here because because it was part of that article, but I had a professor back when I was in graduate school, and he asked me, excuse me for 1 second, I think I brought this up here with me. He said, you should read this book. And he said, and I know that you've read a lot of Karl Marx, which I had by that time, and he said, but there's a lot of cumbersome stuff that you've read. He wrote a book, he said, when he was 27 years old, getting similar to yourself. You're getting up into, I was in my early 20s at the time, but he was getting up into my, by the time I get into my mid or later 20s, he said this will have some relevance to me when I leave graduate school. And he said, read it. It's about, he had just graduated from University of Heidelberg, just gotten his PhD. He sits down and he's saying to himself, what the heck do I do with the rest of my life? What do I do? I'm looking all over the place. How am I going to settle? What am I going to do? He starts writing a little letter to himself. It became known as the early manuscripts of 1844. Within that, about halfway through, he writes this one line, free conscious activity is the human species character. He stops there and he looks at it. He expands on it a little bit, and this is how he described it later in life. And he looks and he looks. This became the driving force for him as an intellectual and what he was composing. And he had that motivational force for him was this one quote. And what it means is what we're talking about here in terms of restless genes. Curiosity. Curiosity became for him the driving force of human beings. This is our nature, our human species character. So he said, for the rest of my life, I'm going to devote myself to trying to create, for better or worse, many conflicts that I might have in general with Karl Marx, but there are certainly criticisms that any number of people have. But he said, for better or worse, and this is what I'm going to do. And he wanted to create social, economic, political systems that would allow people to be able to enact their species character, to be able to be free, conscious, active beings, to look, to create, whether it be through the arts, through science, through whatever. So that is what I have to do. And think about that as we talk about in the next couple of slides here too. So our premise here for today, science and the global public then can be seen in a contract relationship. Right? And this is the whole global public, and science as a profession. So in a contract relationship, research generally flourishes when the public which supports it and ultimately makes use of its products has high regard for its ways and means. We've heard this many times the last day and a half. So certainly, when the public applauds science and feels that it does good, then it works for science too. And they want science to do well. The public does. Why? The global public bestows on science the pathway responsibility for its hope as it relates to the extended future. The global public bestows on science the pathway responsibility for its hope as it relates to the extended future. This is not something that I'm just conjuring up, by the way. I'll talk a little bit about the science related here, and all that I'm talking about today is, this is all just in brief, kind of a very skeletal version of work we've been working on for the last few years. Therefore, every effort must be made to bolster the invaluable commodities of respect, truth, and trust as they relate to science. The public has endowed on science a great responsibility. It wants science, and I include all people in this room, to be the community of science. It wants science to take us to the promised land. It is more important than religion. It is more important than education. It is more important than government, than finance, than whatever. All of these various social institutions in global surveys have been shown to be not even near to what the hope or to the trust that science has, or excuse me, that the public has in science. Hope, and it's not. This is not a vague, wishy-washy virtue or quality. Put simply, in Charles Snyder's hope theory, hope involves the will to get there and different ways to get there. For those of you that don't have hope, and I was I had a few years ago, I lived in New York City for about 20 years, and I was asked to go up and to give a talk at Covenant House. Anybody know anything about New York City in here? New York City is obviously a huge monster place, just like Seoul. And Covenant House was a home for adolescents and young adults, children between the ages of 12 to 21. Came there, homeless youth and the like. I went up there to give a talk, a public health talk. And I gave the talk, and afterwards, 3 or 4 of the young people, about 15, came up and asked me if they'd sit down and talk with them for a while. And this young lady took the lead. And after I finished, and she looked at me and she said, "This is all well and good," but she said, "But you understand and look around this room. Hope is not something that we have." And she used the word actually as hope. And she said, "I live day to day. My friends here live day to day. I don't expect to be alive in the next year. I'm just living now to try to make it and to try to exist." And that's a point that it drove it home to me. This is a real quality for us. Hope means, and I'm a social psychologist by training, you have those images inside that make you have confidence about your future. And as it says here, and as Snyder would say, you have the will and the drive. You've heard it from others who tell you that you have the ability to get there, and here's the way that you can get there. Here is a way to do it. And you will find success for yourself, and then you will also be able to make contributions to the general human welfare. So hope is not just a feel-good emotion. It's a dynamic, cognitive, motivational system within inside of ourselves. And it is one that we inculcate, that we develop, that we build, that it grows inside of us with the proper social development that we, as humans, as young people. We grow into human beings, into adult human beings that become hopeful. If we are not hopeful, the world is generally not a very good place for us. It is a very threatening place. Science itself is on the side of hope. So, instruction, and let me just give you a couple of ideas. Let me talk about a couple of things that you should be conscious of about the responsible conduct of research. Integrity, as I mentioned, it's such an important issue here. As I mentioned back here, the global public disposed on science responsibility. Every effort must be made to bolster the invaluable commodities of respect, truth, and trust. That's enormously important. If we find ourselves being like, used car salesmen, we are going to have some serious problems. Or in the United States, or if you're evaluated or given the same kind of prestige value that you would give to a politician, which for the first time ever in the United States, politicians now have 9% positive ratings. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. If you have that, then you are not trusted, and it becomes a very, very difficult proposition. Instruction in the responsible conduct, and this comes out of HHS, Office of Research Integrity, Responsible Conduct of Research Guidance in 2005. It was mentioned yesterday by John Gallant, and he talked about this particular item or aspect. Responsible conduct of research need not be driven by federal mandates. It derives from a premise fundamental to doing good science. The responsible conduct of research is not distinct from research. And if somebody is doing research that can be called, or research that has, that ends up being research misconduct, that is falsifying if you falsify, if you fabricate, if you plagiarize, misuse your funds and inappropriately, what they would say in this guidance, that is, then you are not a researcher. You are not a scientist. You are not allowed to become one of the group. So it is and it shouldn't be thought of. I mean, we sit here in this room, and I've even heard in this last presentation from the speaker here who preceded me, and it was a brilliant presentation, and I was enjoying it very much. But one of the things he talked about is that people are in a hurry. They want to get on to the next thing, the next item. And so these things like IRB or IACUC become impediments to some people. But you can't be thinking of it like that. You have to do good research. It has to be inculcated with, it has to be infused with integrity. So, best interest, the recurring research integrity themes then of the last 35 years, and this is where it has really become, since about 1980, where it's become most significant, are truthfulness, trust, and best interest. And you can find this in the literature, really, around the world and in the United States. Best interest is a broad and inclusive principle. What's in the best interest of the public and science? And you have to think of those two together, that contract again. It is directed in almost any constituency that can be conceived, researchers, subjects, economies, environment. In general, society writ large, present and future, thus the social contract. And scientists need to understand that we have this relationship with the global public, both, the past, present, future. We have a responsibility. They have infused upon us the responsibility of hope. The AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, in 2011 put out a paper, their newsletter, talked about reshaping RCR education. They talked about two fundamental types of responsibilities associated with scientists. One focuses on the internal workings of science and the responsibility to uphold community standards for doing science. That's like our professional groups and our colleagues and within our departments and that. And that has been the limit of it for quite a long time. In the last 5 years or so, we have found this other outward directed responsibility. It has become called social responsibility, focusing on science, social responsibilities to the larger community, which experiences the risk, cost, and benefit of science. You have to understand that relationship in order to be able to move forward in terms of ethics. Social responsibility in the last 2, 3, 4 years has become kind of a front burner issue. Was anybody here in in Singapore, when the Singapore statement was put together? Remember the battle about social responsibility? I was there on the floor, and I was just, it was hard because they did not want to have that in there. It changes the whole complexion of what science is about. But the group voted, what was it, something like 300 to 100, something like that. Remember that in the standing floor vote? And they voted, yes, social responsibility is necessary, and we have to integrate this into it. And it has become integral now to science. So, science and society, to give you a little bit of statistics, it's there, you can go fishing for it. I didn't do much in terms of Google when I was fishing for this about a year or so ago. Science and Society, a global survey, it's called it. It was done by Nature back in September 2010. Worldwide respondents to the Science and Society survey overwhelmingly agreed that scientists are more trustworthy than other public figures. Scientists are more trustworthy than other public figures. That's globally. It's not just the United States or some, Australia or whatever. This is a global survey. And Even more important, the investment in science this is the general population of the world speaking, and the investment in science is the key to future well-being and economic growth. So you've got statistics there, you've got data to work with to tell you, but we need to do it well or it dries up. Let me give you another example here about how it can dry up. The Harris poll, many of you in this room have heard, everybody does surveys and does polls and that, especially around election time. You have polls coming out, and the Harris poll is like Gallup, Quinnipiac. I don't know what kind of agencies do polling here in Korea, but it is one of the bigger polling agencies in the United States. Back in 1977, I was told by somebody who is familiar with the issue, the people at Harris poll got together and said, man, we're getting our bottoms kicked by Gallup and some of these other people, and we've got to find something that will give us some credibility or give us some credibility with the public. So they decide to do an occupational prestige poll. They do about 400 occupations, carpenters and plumbers and politicians and bankers and scientists and doctors and military people and religious people, and I could go on and on and on, about the top few hundred occupations in the United States. One of the biggest ones, the one that I wanted to brought up here from 1977 and moving on to the present, biggest changes in occupations rated for the highest prestige level, because they had 5 prestige levels: highest prestige, prestigious, kind of middle range, lower prestige, the lowest prestige. And and it's very basic. That's all they're asking people. Where do they fall within these? Lawyers and scientists, lawyers have dropped from 20 points over the last 35 plus years, and down from 36 to 16%. Not surprising, really, considering a lot of the issues related to lawyers and these days. More important for us, though, since 1977, scientists have dropped 36 points for the highest prestige level, for 66%. 1977, 66% of the populace, of the public, said scientists have the greatest prestige. They were at the top. They were up there with firefighters and I can't remember who the others were at the time. 66, and then there was about 30% who rated them, or 25, whatever it was, having prestige. Well, it goes on here and talks about that. From 66 to 30% with the absolute highest. Just from 2009, over the last 5 years, scientists have dropped from 79% to 76% having more prestige to 24% having less prestige, down in the lower rank. That's significant. We're dropping 76, where they get that 76, 30% with great prestige, and 46% say that they have prestige. What we've seen then is a drop. It's been a small drop, but how far do you wait? 66, they're still prestigious occupation, but a drop from 66 to 30%, but people considering it having the greatest prestige, is very, very significant and something to worry about. These statistics are held up around the world. I've looked at them, and there are various countries that do these similar kind of occupational surveys and do that. Okay, so let me finish up. I've got just a couple, I think I've got myself a couple of slides here to finish up with. One that I would advise you or suggest to you. I have used this book. It came out in 2002 by the National Academies in the United States. You can get a free copy. It's in PDF online, free of charge. I've used it. If you're trying to find a way of stimulating your administration into funding a broad responsible conduct or research program or education program, you can use this. There are some really good things within it. For instance, this is the one we talked about here. It's on the first page. The public will support science only if it can trust the scientists and institutions that conduct research. But the most important thing about this particular report from the National Academies is, for a scientist, integrity embodies above all the individual's commitment to intellectual honesty and personal responsibility. That's, again, as my colleague talked about, that's an individual quality that we find in the West, and scientists themselves are supposed to be honest and have personal responsibility. All well and good. The really dynamic or the really important step forward was for an institution, integrity is a commitment to creating an environment that promotes responsible conduct by embracing standards of excellence, trustworthiness, and lawfulness. This particular phrase means that institutions now, and that's very different from the United States, which considers individuals to be, individuals to be sacrosanct. And now it's considering institutions have to take responsibility, and they have to develop themselves. Since that time, I am told by Peggy Fisher, who was the head of Research Ethics Investigation at National Science Foundation, in 2006, there was a decision made by the inspectors general to look at institutions as well as individuals when there is research misconduct or financial problems or whatever. So here's what we end up with if we don't do what we're supposed to do in science. This Time is a popular magazine in the United States, and we end up with a front page cover saying "Science Under Siege." And we have ourselves problems. And then I'll wrap up with this one quote from Robert Livingston. He was the head of Oxford University. And he said, "One is apt to think of moral failure as due to weakness of character. More often it is due to an inadequate ideal." What he meant by that, and he was speaking about children, that sometimes when children get into trouble, we talk about them as having weak moral fiber or weak moral character. He is saying more often it is due to an inadequate ideal, and what he meant by that, it is the social institutions that have failed, whether it be schools or whether it be legal institutions or political institutions. They have failed in their responsibilities to integrate into those children the values, the inadequate ideals, the values that are necessary to be able to carry on as contributing members of society. It's a cop-out to think, okay, that people have some type of, he said, I think in 95% of cases, we could say that it is society's responsibility to take when we have ourselves aberrant children and aberrant young people. We do not do what we need to do in terms of helping them to understand what the true values are. Okay, that's it.